Saw last year a deal where the consideration was a safe, a simple agreement for future equity, meaning that the acquirer, the quote unquote acquirer here, was paying with a safe. Now, if you are familiar with safes, a safe is a piece of paper. It's an IOU that says, I'm giving you this piece of paper. And this piece of paper means that at a later date, when I have an equity financing round, you get to convert this piece of paper into equity in my business. So to take a step back, I know I just said a lot there, but just what the actual transaction was a buyer giving a safe, an IOU to another tech company and buying their company that way. So what was the target? Was the seller actually getting? They were getting a right to future equity in the buyer and future equity in a round that hadn't happened yet. And so that's just one example where we're seeing both VC investors as well as founders getting creative in how they're finding liquidity or how they're growing their business.
So that's actually really interesting to me. I see safes are being used in crowdfunding, for example, where people can invest in something and then the price of the shares will be determined at some point in the future, maybe, or there or not, or it could be set at the time of the transaction based on that valuation. So I'm just wondering though, with these private transactions, how does that really work? Like, let's say that person then with that safe just does a private placement with one investor. Would that then trigger the safe, or does it have to be like a big round?
Right. So, as with safes where, it's a startup raising from a bunch of investors in a more crowdfunding type of situation,
Hmm.
there's similar structures apply. So the safe had terms by which it was triggered, right? What triggers conversion. And so usually there's something called the qualified financing or, a conversion event, and it sets a threshold for how much. So in this case, again, the buyer is giving this. So that save will convert into equity in the buyer when the buyer goes out and raises kind of in a
A
context
minimum,
like you're familiar,
right?
raises from outside investors, but it needs to raise a certain amount.
Mm.
And usually with safes, it's also a certain type of equity round, right? Although not always the case, it may specify that it can't just be a sale of common stock, or it usually carves out shares to advisors. It needs to be a true preferred equity financing round. So, a series seed or series A, something like that of a certain dollar threshold in order to trigger conversion. That's usually how they work. And in that particular deal, that's how it worked.
Yeah.